the environment doesn't know any boundaries. You know, dust and pollution from China settles in the U.S. You know, nuclear radiation from Chernobyl went over Iceland. What goes up into the environment goes around the world, and ultimately this thin layer of topsoil, maybe 6 inches of soil around this hard planet spinning in space, represents the dust of our ancestors. All human history and all the other creatures are in that soil. And to contaminate that and the water supply and the air is an unforgivable sin. It's something that we'll pay for as a species in generations to come.
First, the news this morning. The Senate Agriculture Committee is considering a bill that would ban the export of dangerous pesticides. Farm workers from abroad told lawmakers yesterday of devastating health problems from exposure to chemicals made by American companies. Wyatt Andrews has that story.
Costa Rican farmer Mario Zumbato used to grow bananas for export to America until he believes the pesticides he sprayed on the plants made him and 800 other workers sterile. He told a Senate committee there were times when he virtually bathed in a chemical that U.S. companies and officials knew could render men impotent. The issue in Congress would seem to be simple. If a chemical is banned or unlicensed as too dangerous to use in America, should it be morally wrong to export it somewhere else? Aside from morality, many experts believe Americans are eating these pesticides in produce grown overseas, the so-called circle of poison.
Okay, so we can just start with an introduction, just your name and...
Okay, David Weir.
All right, and
journalist.
What inspired you to write The Circle of Poison?
Well, you know, the Circle of Poison really started for me years before when I was in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan. And my wife and I were in this little remote northern town called Talokan. There's absolutely nothing to do there. And we were bored, and one day we'd picked up some food from the American Embassy when we were in Kabul. And she was reading the ingredients on the Kool-Aid packet that she'd gotten, which shows there wasn't a lot to read in Talokan. And she said, "Holy cow, there's cyclamates in this." I said, "Wait, they're banned by the US government. How could a banned substance end up in a poor country like Afghanistan?" And so that started the investigation, where I started to realize that systematically, anything that was banned or heavily regulated or restricted or unregistered in the US was being allowed by the US government and in fact encouraged to be sent overseas, almost as compensation for the companies for losing the US market.
Pesticides are pushed on grounds that it's a very modern way to do farming. I remember years ago reading a book that India is underdeveloped because it doesn't use pesticides. Now, we've made poisons the measure of progress. And Kerala did not need this. It's called God's own country. It is so beautiful. It has some of the best health indicators in the world. 100% literacy. And you go and spray poison on them.
You're also like Annie is our Anne Leonard. She's also in Berkeley. She actually brought us into the whole toxic world. The issue of pesticide in Kasaragod is a very unique case. The first response or the first impact of pesticide is on animals. We have the bees disappearing, we have the dogs dying, the chickens dying, snakes dying in the plantation area. And initially the people were really happy because the snakes are dying, the jackals are dying. So no jackal will come and catch your chicken, so you're happy. You can walk in the plantation freely because all the snakes are gone. But in a year's time, they found that their chicken is also disappearing. In 2 years' time, they found that they can no longer keep dogs because the dogs are dying. And suddenly you have the impacts visible on human beings. And when the impacts became visible on human beings, like the what we call brain edema and the swollen heads, the people born without limbs, in certain cases people born with the urethra and the entire things outside the body. You name the human disorder which can happen to a body, you see in Kasaragod.
When we actually went there and then started to understand the issue of the pesticide, endosulfan, the local community, generally they were not at all aware of the impact which a pesticide can cause. We realized that there is no other source of pollution in that area because it's a pristine village. So we were also not very sure whether it is caused by the pesticide. But then slowly when we started collecting the information on pesticide only, we realized that these things can happen through pesticide.
Probably the earlier signs and symptoms was in very early 90s, like 91, 92, 93, that kind of period. By 2000, 2001, it was every day there was some child born with something. So, but in Kasaragod, we see a lot of new ones born with genotoxic effects. The child is not exposed, but their parents are exposed, and the children are born with deformities. That is happening today.
Deep in the cashew plantations of India, Dr. Nushad and his mobile medical team visit survivors of one of the worst pesticide disasters in the world.
She was the former place for the plantation. Here all full of cashews. Here also itself sprayed by the endosulfan. മുമ്പത്തെ പറയുന്ന ഇതുവരെയൊന്നും കൊണ്ടിട്ടില്ല. മുമ്പ് ഇരിക്കുകയൊക്കെ ചെയ്യുന്നു? തീരെ ഇല്ല.
നല്ല തടിയുണ്ടായി, നല്ല ഉഷാറുണ്ടായി. 7 മാസം ആവുന്നവരേക്ക് നല്ല ഉഷാറുണ്ടായി. പിന്നെ തളർന്നുകൊണ്ട് പോയി. ഒന്നും ആക്കില്ല, കറന്ന് വേണ്ടിട്ടാ പെരുന്നിട്ട് എഴിഞ്ഞു വന്നിട്ടില്ല, ഒന്നുമില്ല.
ഇവിടെ ഈ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ കോർപ്പറേഷൻ ഇവിടെ അടുത്ത് സ്പ്രേ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്?
അല്ല, ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ വന്ന ശേഷം ഫുള്ള് ഇതന്നെ കശുമാവിൻ്റെ
ഇവിടെ കശുമാവുണ്ടോ?
ഫുള്ള് ഇത് വീട് വെച്ചെടുത്തെല്ലാം ഫുള്ള് ഇത് എൻ്റെ ഞാൻ കല്യാണം കഴിഞ്ഞ് വന്നത്.
After birth, the parents noticed that she's not having all the development milestones like turning over, doing some activities. All are delayed. So they consult doctor and diagnosed us. She's having cerebral palsy.
Needs to be enlisted based on the description by the district and family. We can give the treatment part of that. As of now, we have 5,500 enlisted victims, of which we are in the process of rehabilitation. We are providing health rehabilitation to them, which includes mobile medical units, comprehensive free treatment. This may be just a tip of an iceberg. There are newborns which are having the similar health effects in the area which is found to have more endosulfan contamination.
അരിവാളൊക്കെ കൊണ്ടുവച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടല്ലോ, വരുന്നവർ വെട്ടാൻ വേണ്ടിട്ടാണ്. She was an absolutely normal child before the exposure of the endosulfan.
How old was she?
Now she is 38.
How old was she when it happened? When she collapsed?
എത്ര വയസ്സുള്ളപ്പോഴായിരുന്നു സംഭവം? She was at 6 years. She was studying second standard when she was running behind. Actually, itself it shows that she was running. She was running behind the helicopter, and if she is having this much deformity, this much problems in the childhood, she was not able to run. Actually, it shows that she was normal. That time she was absolutely normal. She was able to run behind the helicopter. Then after spraying, she just collapsed and became like this.
Nearly 40% of victims have neurological disorders. The government provides free special education for affected children, who Dr. Nushad checks on at one of the schools.
Actually, we have 11 panchayats, affected panchayats, and our school, seven schools running for these panchayats. സിറാജ് വരുന്നുണ്ട്. സിറാജ് കാണുന്നുണ്ടല്ലേ? He's saying to sit. This is the eldest son of this family. His name is Afsal. He is suffering from hydrocephalus. This is also the continuation of this hydrocephalus through the central canal of spinal cord. Afsal, kanna kayirundda.
We perceive the US government as one which is for the corporates. Starting from DDT in 1972, when the US banned it, then they still produced it and exported it to Africa and Asia. Even after 50 years, they're doing the same thing. It is very unfortunate.
Gas is dropped from planes either as a spray or in gas bombs. But should enemy raiders use gas against your community, there is no reason for fear or panic.
Before World War II, there wasn't widespread use of pesticides. There was reliance on some individual chemicals. But during and after World War II, when companies began to develop these chemistries for war, they were looking for new markets for the same chemicals, and so turned to food and agriculture after war, and things like organophosphates, which are nerve poisons, were then pushed into agriculture. Many of them are still used widespread in agriculture. Some of the classes that we're most concerned about are those in the DDT family that stay around for generations and that migrate around the world. They migrate on wind and water currents, kind of doing this what they call the grasshopper effect. Whereas it heats up, they kind of settle out, and as the air heats up, they go in the air, they settle out, and they make their way to the Arctic eventually.
Without war, we wouldn't have pesticides. Maybe that's an irony, maybe not. But one way or another way, this is what we ended up with. In the early 70s, it was clear we had problems, health problems and environmental problems we'd never experienced before, thanks to pesticides. That's when the US government enacted FIFRA, one provision of which allowed the continual production and manufacturing of pesticides that were not permitted for use here to be exported overseas. That set up the whole regulatory loophole that created this, allowed the circle of poison to come true.
A lot of us think that, pesticides like endosulfan are banned, that we no longer produce them because we realize that it's too toxic for our health, it's too toxic for our environment, and so therefore we put an end to them. It's now illegal to use those kinds of chemicals and other pesticides in the United States. Well, the job's not over because there's been an exit created or escape hatch for the pesticide producers. They continue to produce these banned, restricted pesticides in our communities inside the United States. And they do this for foreign export.
Limited data from EPA in 2013 revealed that banned, restricted, and unregistered pesticides are manufactured in 23 states for export only. EPA doesn't track the volume or final destination of these pesticides, which are then applied to crops like coffee, tea, cotton, fruit and vegetables, and may indeed be imported back to the United States as pesticide residues on these foods. The FDA only inspects 2% of imported produce, so the true risk to the United States consumer is unknown.
There's a contradiction here because I think when you look at nuclear technology, we're very careful in how we export that technology. But, I think one of the major concerns we've got to admit is that we worry that an abuse of that technology or a misuse of that technology will come back to hurt the United States in some way or another. We need to have that same attitude with pesticides.
When I step back and really think about the scope of what we've done, it's been a giant, terrible, tragic experiment. It goes way beyond pesticides, to asbestos, lead paint, to flame retardants, to all kinds of products, drugs, pharmaceuticals that were not properly studied and cleared for safety before we turned them into products. All those products and all that export and all the damage that's been done for decades, the first politician that really took notice of this was President Jimmy Carter.
When I was getting ready to leave office, I had exhausted my effort to get Congress to pass it, but we had all the material to show that we were doing something that was basically unscrupulous or illegal as far as international law goes. But the manufacturers of these dangerous materials and items were so powerful that they obstructed what I did. So the only thing I could do was to issue an executive order as a last resort, and it precluded the distribution or sale of any material, basically, overseas that we couldn't safely present to consumers in America. I wanted the brand Made in America really to mean something. As soon as I left office, they descended on President Reagan, Ronald Reagan, and he agreed to protect their right to continue selling pesticides and flammable clothing and unproved or disproved drugs or condemned items to people overseas just so that the manufacturers could get rid of them and not take a big loss. More than 30 years after I left the White House, the issue is still unresolved. And I would say that at this point, the power and influence of unscrupulous companies and their lobbyists is even more powerful than it was when I was in the White House.
When we speak of the circle of poison, we most often think of the danger to American consumers. We think of foreign-grown food, some scarcely inspected by the FDA at U.S. borders, food tainted with U.S.-made pesticides that EPA considers cancer-causing and too dangerous for domestic farm use. Today, chemical companies still export tons of pesticides that EPA consider too dangerous for our farmers to use. Yet EPA cannot tell us how many of these made in the U.S. unregistered pesticides are currently being exported.
Senator Leahy was the first elected official after President Carter who tried to stop the circle of poison by introducing 3 bills in the 1990s.
Well, when I first introduced it, we had a lot of pushback by lobbyists in the Senate. We had enough people in the Senate who realized that it was important to stop the circle of poison, and we passed it. But once it got to the House of Representatives, the lobbyists were able to work a lot harder, and they were able to stop it from being in the final bill. We tried mightily. We worked on Saturdays and weekends, everything else on the bill, but could not get that part through. There are very powerful interests that make a lot of money by selling things they know are contaminated. And the fact that we might be able to make money and create a few jobs here and poison people in other countries, whether it's asbestos or lead paint or something, we shouldn't do that.
Mr. Vroom, are you?
Yes, Senator.
You're the lead-off that allows all your members to be able to say either they fully agree with you or, my God, what's he talking about?
That's correct.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Lugar. I would like to welcome the other 6 senior executives of NACA member companies that joined me on this panel today.
One of Senator Leahy's main opponents to the bill was Jay Vroom. Mr. Vroom has represented the pesticide industry in Washington for nearly 3 decades.
Carefully prepared, advanced written statement.
And our argument in 1990 with Senator Leahy and others, as it is today, is that we would rather that the United States be a principal source of providing crop protection tools for farmers around the world and the incubator, if you will, for innovation for that kind of product development, and the follow-on stewardship that companies like those that are based here in the United States can and do provide over the years, rather than having those needs served by product producers of pesticide compounds from places other than the United States.
Do you think you'd find everything safe, or do you think you'd find a whole lot more violations?
Perhaps a little of both. I will tell you, when the agency undertook its investigation last year, we did find a number of violations and filed a number of cases against companies. It was the first time that we had really enforced.
Jay Vroom had allies within the government as well. Linda Fisher of the EPA also opposed the Circle of Poison bill.
So take the case of Linda Fisher. She was an EPA official who argued against the Circle of Poison bill during the first Bush administration. After that, she went to work for Monsanto, actually, as a lobbyist. After that, she went back into government, back as a high official of the EPA in the second Bush administration. And since then, she's become a high official at DuPont. It's a perfect example of how the revolving door of officials moving in and out of government, regulating pesticides and other toxics, and then going to work for the people that produce them.
In 2012, the top 6 pesticide companies hired 116 lobbyists. 112 of them were either former members of Congress or former members of a major government agency like the EPA, the FDA, the USDA. 116 lobbyists, 112 either former members of Congress or people who used to work at our federal agencies. And so since 2004, the big 6 pesticide companies have spent almost $220 million in lobbying just the federal government. Just the federal government. That doesn't even include the states. And what makes that so much more effective, of course, is that they're using former members of Congress, former chairs of the ag committees, former major players at the EPA, the USDA, as their lobbyists. And what makes it ironic is that many of these people, before they became congressmen, or before they came to the government, actually worked for these very same companies.
So the big 6 are the 6 agrochemical companies that control upwards of 75% of the global pesticide trade. And the big six by name are Monsanto, Dow, Bayer, Syngenta, DuPont, and BASF. And those 6 global corporations really control the terms of food and farming.
While a handful of Western companies continue to make record profits, they do so at the expense of farm workers around the world. According to a recent report, developing countries tend to use more pounds per acre and more toxic chemicals than the United States and Europe, yet they have few resources to protect their communities from pesticide exposure.
Pero pues no hay más trabajo aquí. La gente que no tiene estudios, que no tienen otra cosa que hacer, la mayoría se va al campo. Y así seguido se muere, la gente está acabando, la gente y ellos enriqueciéndose a costillas de la gente pobre, porque la gente más pobre es la que va y trabaja allá.
Como aquí es una comunidad muy pobre, que toda la gente vivimos de trabajar en el campo. Y esas muchachas empezaron a trabajar en el campo porque era la oportunidad que les daban, como de bajos recursos y por no tener cómo viajar para ir a trabajar a otras partes.
Se llama Juan Antonio Rodríguez Coronado.
He was born on June 28th and he's 2 now.
Pues los primeros meses de embarazo.
Pero anteriormente ya trabajaba ella, ¿verdad?
Anteriormente sí. Antes de embarazarse ya trabajaba en los campos. Toda la vida ha trabajado en los campos.
His mom worked her whole life in the fields, and so before the pregnancy she was working in the fields and for the first few months of the pregnancy.
Tiene diagnosticado el cirrosis hepática.
So he's been diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver.
Pues conforme él se enfermó, empezó con un poquito hinchado, después fue creciendo. Para ver el hígado, él tiene aquí una cicatriz acá.
So he started out when he was born a little bit swollen, but it's gotten much worse. And you can see they did a operation and they took a look at his liver, and in June they said that he just has about 3 years to live and that there's nothing they can do now. It really is something that, of course, deeply affects me as a human, like all of us, but especially as a nurse, I feel, a deep need to stop this and, stop this effect that it's having on the children, and all of the people here.
Y así hay infinidad de casos. En Potan se han visto muchos casos, señoras que están embarazadas, que van al campo, trabajan, los niños les salen malos. Y es que en el campo los ponen a trabajar, la gente anda trabajando, recogiendo la fruta, la verdura, lo que sea. Y los que andan fumigando andan con las cosas así, sin protección, sin nada, y la gente ahí trabajando. Los lonchis están ahí en el suelo, también les pasa todo. Todo respiran, todo reciben en la piel y en todas partes. ¿Y qué va a hacer la gente? Tienen que trabajar para poder comer.
Probably the most dramatic way to understand the difference between domestic regulation and the lack of regulation once you cross the border as it affects pesticide use in people is just south of the border in Mexico. Take the Sonora Desert, split down the middle by an arbitrary border between countries. So on one side, pesticides that can't be used aren't being used. On the other side, they are used. And there's evidence of the effects.
In 1998, Dr. Gillette conducted a study of pesticide exposure in Mexico. She compared the children living in the pesticide-intensive Yaqui Valley to those in the non-exposed foothills. After playing catch with the children and observing them dropping raisins into a bottle cap, Gillette found disturbing differences in hand-eye coordination between the groups of children.
She looked at 4 and 5-year-olds and 5 and 6-year-olds, and one of the things she asked them to do was draw a picture of a person, and found that the children in the non-exposed areas drew people just like, I think, any kids anywhere. You could tell they were people drawn by very young children. Many of the children in the highly exposed areas to pesticides just drew scribbles. You couldn't even tell that they were people.
El tiempo de cuando es la cosecha, o más bien cuando es el siembra y producción, el agua circula constantemente por los canales. Y yo señalaba que esa agua lo consumen los animales, lo consumen a veces las personas, y es donde viene un contagio o viene una enfermedad que desgraciadamente trae consecuencias fatales.
Como podemos ver, este es un cultivo de trigo y se están realizando unas aplicaciones dirigidas para controlar ciertos pulgones o ciertas malezas, pero en la cual, como podemos observar, las aplicaciones carecen de toda seguridad para, en este caso, para el que lo anda aplicando, y que son productos altamente tóxicos.
No hay la seguridad, no hay el complemento de atención en cuanto a que el trabajador debe estar prevenido o debe estar protegido. No lo hay. Hemos visto que no ha habido, desde hace mucho tiempo, no ha habido precisamente este interés en proteger al ser humano, hablando ya de la existencia de la persona.
Eso es lo que está pasando aquí en la comunidad de los 8 pueblos de la tribu Yaqui. Eso es lo que tenemos nosotros ahorita, esa problemática de los pesticidas.
One of the best examples of a place where people are chronically exposed to chemical pollution is in Louisiana, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans along the Mississippi, where there's 150 industrial facilities all along that corridor. In fact, the industry calls it the chemical corridor. Residents have a different name for it. What do they call it? Cancer Alley.
In many communities, especially here in Louisiana, you can look out of your bedroom window and you're looking at a smokestack, and you smell the toxic fumes on a daily basis. We have lost historic African American communities because of the toxic exposures from those companies warranting the relocation of those communities. So the entire towns of these historic communities have been razed, and the only thing you now see, if there's any sign that they once existed, might be their old cemetery grounds, while the facilities have gotten larger and expanded into those historic communities that once lived and thrived in this area. There's a culture in the state that really gives the industrial corporations running these facilities a blank check. They pay nothing in property taxes. They get to, through their campaign contributions, basically elect whoever's going to be in a legislative control of lawmaking in the state. They have a lobby that denies and takes away rights of citizens in the state for health care, for health monitoring in the event of a toxic exposure. So we're in a real sad situation in terms of the power that these industrial corporations have in Louisiana and companies like Monsanto along with them.
Monsanto is like all big agrochemical companies, highly profitable and highly influential in political circles. A few years ago, they completed a multi-$100 million expansion of the Roundup plant, for instance, in Cancer Alley.
Please welcome our Governor, Bobby Jindal, and our First Lady, Supriya Jindal.
Governor Jindal, whose wife is a former Monsanto employee, praised the expansion of the Roundup plant in 2010. Every year since then, this plant in Cancer Alley has had the most toxic releases in the entire state.
It's really important to remember there's a real difference in any pesticide between its active ingredient, which in the case of Roundup, for example, is glyphosate, versus all the surfactants and inerts that go into that full pesticide when it's sprayed. And to demonstrate this, a researcher, he had 2 ponds with frogs in them, and in one pond, he just put the active ingredient of Roundup, glyphosate. Had very little impact on the frogs. In the next pond, he put the whole formula. Devastation, 80, 90%, depending on the developmental stage of the frog of death in those frogs. So that shows you the difference between just an active ingredient and the whole formula. It turned out there that the surfactant, that part of Roundup that makes it stick to the crop, was what was so fatal. Working with the other ingredients in Roundup, so fatal to those frogs.
So Roundup's legal, by the way. Roundup isn't a banned chemical. So one thing that's important to consider is, on some levels, it doesn't matter whether an agricultural chemical has been banned or restricted very much yet, because we simply don't know what the negative effects of most of these chemicals will be over time. They're not studied as complete compounds. They're isolated, narrow chemical tests that are performed on them. Of course, they're not studied on human beings. That would be unethical. So essentially, it's a big experiment, and we just don't know. Whether it's regulated or not shouldn't prohibit us from speculating and also investigating what are the effects of these legal chemicals. Some of them may be as bad as the banned ones.
A standard argument against a health environment and other regulations in the country or for export is that it's harmful to business, which of course it is. I mean, if business can kill people freely, it's a lot more profitable than if you have to pay attention to what you're producing and look at the effects on people and so on. On the other hand, if you do care about harming people, the profits just don't matter. And in fact, it's kind of interesting in this country that major industries like lead, asbestos, tobacco, chemical, the industries have often succeeded for decades poisoning people quite consciously. You know, they knew perfectly well that children are going to die of lead poisoning, but you got to make profit. And they're right. It's a system which you're supposed to make profit. Like a CEO of a corporation is actually required by law to increase profit. So they're doing exactly what they have to do. And if the population suffers, well, you know, it's the cost of doing business, you know. Of course, by the time you get to export, it's a little more vicious, because here what's happening, of course, is the domestic population has become organized enough and active enough, so they're saying you can't kill us. So then the idea is, okay, we'll kill people who are more vulnerable. That's what the export is. But yes, it's good for business, undoubtedly.
Acá los chicos que juntan soja, están haciendo casitas con la soja, investigan si hay plaguicida. Acá hayan plaguicida en el agua, es cuando hayan, estamos hablando del 2002. Acá nos llevan el agua nosotros, acá hay una chica con leucemia. O sea, está todo acá. Esta familia, Ezequiel murió con tumores, tenía 23 tumores en la cabeza y en la columna y en la cabeza 3 tumores. La hermana Débora tiene tumores, la madre tiene tumores, el hermano tiene tumores. Estas son familias enteras por los agroquímicos. Y bueno, y acá está el mapa, que si ustedes ven el mapa de Barrio Ituzaingó, tenemos soja, soja y soja. Justamente la gente acá se está enfermando en Latinoamérica y está padeciendo los daños que están produciendo los agroquímicos. En mi barrio fue declarado inhabitable, es un barrio contaminado por agroquímicos y están naciendo muchos chiquitos con malformación y muchos cánceres, cáncer de mama, cáncer de intestino, tumores en la cabeza. Te digo que nosotros lo hemos sufrido y lo estamos viviendo.
Durante muchos años, nosotros en la Argentina en el año 96 se aprobaron la utilización de soja transgénica y eso fue generando de que año a año vaya aumentando la cantidad de agroquímicos que se usan en la Argentina. Nosotros estábamos usando 30 millones de litros hace 15 años y en la última campaña se han usado 340 millones de litros. Sí pasamos. Y esto se pudo hacer sobre la base de una gran campaña publicitaria que decían que estos productos no eran tóxicos. Confiábamos en que esta situación era segura, digamos.
Y bueno, yo decidí ir puerta por puerta porque, bueno, hacía poco tiempo que había fallecido mi hija por malformación y bueno, y no podía aceptar la muerte de mi hija, donde a la casa que iba golpeaba, le decía qué enfermedad tenía. Después fui a la otra vecina, había perdido otro hijo y ahí me encontré de que la mayoría de la gente había perdido un hijo, estaba enfermo y bueno, decidí investigar. Y bueno, eso hizo un detonante en que pensé yo que a mi hija le había podido pasar algo de eso. Entonces hice un pequeño mapa, le tomaba el nombre, el apellido, la dirección, dónde se atendía y qué enfermedad tenía. Y lo llevé al Ministerio de Salud, donde en el Ministerio de Salud me dijeron que quién había hecho eso. Y le dije que lo había hecho yo, había ido casa por casa y me dice, no, dice porque no está pasando nada, ¿no? Le digo, nos estamos enfermando y no sé qué. ¿Por qué? Y ahí nos cajonearon la información porque no se dio a conocer y la cajonearon. O sea que cuando fumigan, nos fumigaban a todos. Por eso es que la gente se enfermó. No están todos puestos, porque no entra la cantidad de enfermos, no entra en el mapa. Y bueno, y si vos ves, son todos, mientras más cerca del campo está, más casos de cáncer hay. Los más pegados al campo hay más casos de cáncer. Y si vos ves que se va alejando, hay menos casos.
Residents of Ituzaingó reported cancer rates to Sofia that were 41 times the national average in Argentina.
Yo la enfermedad de mi hija nunca la asocié con la soja, con el problema de la fumigaciones, todo eso. Bueno, yo me sentí mal, yo me sentí angustiada porque es muy difícil perder una hija, a mí me hizo mucho mal. Y me cuesta hablarme del tema. Yo me tuve que volver activista porque tuve que salir a defender mis derechos. Y bueno, a ver, y se da el nombre de Grupo Madre porque no fuimos a un encuentro a hacer unas denuncias y nos dice, ¿quiénes son ustedes? Y nosotros no sabíamos qué decir, pues no teníamos nombre, no teníamos nada. Y somos las madres de Ituzaingó, le digo. Y nosotros venimos a reclamar nuestros derechos. Y bueno, ya así ya nos conocieron como las madres de Ituzaingó. Sí, amenazas por teléfono, que me decían que tenía 3 hijos, que me iban a quedar 2 hijos. Así que la Policía Federal me intervino el teléfono. Y otra, se me metió uno con el arma y me la puso en la cabeza y me dijo que me dejaré joder con la soja.
Despite these threats, Sophia and the mothers continued their fight. They ultimately succeeded in getting a local ban on aerial pesticide spraying within 2,500 meters of homes.
Y hace 10 años las maestras cuando sentían el avión invitaban a los niños a salir al patio de la escuela a ver al avión y saludar y recibían todos la nube de agroquímicos. Hoy las maestras cuando sienten el avión cierran toda la ventana, meten a los chicos abajo de la mesa, le dicen a todo el mundo que no respiren porque ya saben de qué son los productos tóxicos, pero lo saben porque Sofía, porque las madres, porque después los médicos han hecho una campaña muy grande para demostrarlo, ¿no?
Esto es trigo. En el caso de las madres de Ituzaingó, eso es un logro a nivel social, que esa gente se haya despertado y haya podido defenderse. Acá no pasa eso. Acá no pasa eso. Anda con cautela porque... Sigan mirando tranquilo, como que quieren comprar los lotes y lo están filmando. Ahí nos vieron, pero no paré, flaco, no paré. Bueno, ¿ves allá los aparatos fumigadores allá atrás?
Ajá.
Las máquinas.
Sí.
Esos tanques amarillos.
All the yellow tanks. Those are the machines they use to fumigate, to spray.
Ahora estamos en un depósito de estas máquinas dedicadas a esta agricultura tóxica, pulverizadores, como verás, protegidas con alarmas, con cercos, con un montón de medidas de seguridad. Y podemos ver allá a la escuela en pleno desamparo, a la intemperie, sin ninguna medida de protección, donde hay chicos allí asistiendo.
Just 400 miles from Ituzaingó, international corporations have made Chacabuco an experimental zone to test new agricultural products, exposing residents to unknown risks.
Entonces tenemos toda esta situación, pero hay también un gran silencio, que no sabemos si es por miedo, por la gran cantidad de plata que ganan, o ese es un tema como fuerte también, el silencio de la gente. O sea, nadie dice que tiene cáncer y se atiende el cáncer como una gripe. Tengo gripe y me estoy haciendo la quimioterapia.
Santiago is breaking the silence through sustainable Chacabuco. His campaign to raise awareness about the government-approved testing taking place in his town.
Aquí en Chacabuco se están desarrollando y multiplicando y apoyando desde el gobierno la utilización de estas sustancias. Y se venden como imagen del desarrollo agropecuario de la zona, del municipio y del país, en donde la utilización de venenos es visto como el progreso de una nación.
It's an interesting conversation because you can grant pesticides everything good they do, and you still have a problem. And that problem is they boost food production from sometimes subsistence levels to spectacular improvements, which is fabulous because it increases the food supply in a hungry world. The problem is it's a blunt instrument trying to fight a nuanced problem, which is the the ecology of agriculture. You need all the different crops and the animals and the species that live together where we grow our foods get affected by this blunt instrument. So it's not that pesticides aren't effective, they're extremely effective. They've been called miracle drugs. They increase our food supply beyond anything else that we've ever had. Fertilizers are helpful also, of course. But the problem is, that's only a short-term success. Inevitably, you have the problem of insect resistance that kicks in, that undermines all of that success, and you have all the environmental and health contamination effects downstream.
When you spray a pesticide, you kill the beneficial insects, and the pest that you're trying to control now emerges resistant. So you have to use far more pesticides because there's nothing to control this new pest. 1,200 times more pests have grown in the world with the use of pesticides. And the pesticide treadmill is this, that you destroy nature's ability to control pests through ecological balance. You then create an inflation in the numbers of pests. You constantly use more pesticide, thinking you're going to control it. What started as 1 spray becomes 60 sprays, becomes 100 sprays. But meantime, your pests overtake your field and new pests emerge.
When it comes to global hunger, the weight of the scientific evidence does not stand behind a regime of pesticides, fertilizers, and hybrid seeds, which is the package that is promoted to solve global hunger by these companies. That's kind of the moral face they put on selling pesticides. In fact, in some of the places around the world that are facing hunger very acutely, their recent studies have shown that organic agriculture results in increased yields when you compare it to a pesticide-reliant system.
It's called vermicompost. This is made out of cow dung and the earthworm. So yeah. So they are our best friends. This earthworm. This is called vermicompost.
About 2 years ago, the Prime Minister of Bhutan invited me to help Bhutan become 100% organic. So what we've been doing in these 2 years is my team goes twice a year and works with the farmers, and the Bhutanese come and train at our farm in Dehradun, where we practice an ecological agriculture with no chemicals, and we have no pests in our fields at all. We have lots and lots of insects, but no pests.
Bhutan's ambitious plan to make all local farms organic would make it the first country in the world to convert to a fully organic agricultural system and ban the sale of pesticides.
Sustainable agriculture has been always very important to Bhutan because our country has very little land under cultivation, and of the whole country we have only about 8% of the land which is actually arable, and of that, because of our limited human resources, we are only cultivating about 2.9% of the land. And to keep that percentage, very low percentage of land cultivable for a long time, it has always been important for the people to make sure that there's enough organic matter so that the soil doesn't degenerate. The soil is always sustained, because for generations this is only the land that we have to farm on, and we just can't use it up in one generation and not leave productive land for the next generation. So it has always been a tradition that is taken care of.
The Bhutan government has very, very clearly decided to not measure growth, which measures only how much commerce takes place, And of course, you can have lots of growth by first creating pesticides. The pesticide industry makes lots of profits, that's growth. People get cancer. The same pesticide companies sell you a patented cancer medicine, that's growth. This growth is not measuring welfare. It is measuring destruction, death, and illness. So Bhutan decided it was going to make happiness the objective. And therefore they focus on gross national happiness. And the Prime Minister, when he wrote to me, he said, there's only one way I see growing gross national happiness. It's by growing organic.
Bhutan is not alone. After seeing the devastating effects of pesticide use in their communities, small farmers around the world are turning to sustainable methods of agriculture.
La banda. Para la traductora.
Oh, gracias.
Esta quinta de verdura tiene 50 años de producción. Hace 50 años que se hace verdura en este lugar. Y la tierra está en buen estado. Nuestra organización, Familias Productoras de Cañuelas, nace hace más o menos unos 12, 13 años atrás, en plena crisis de la Argentina, donde todos nos quedábamos sin trabajo. Muchos de nosotros estuvimos muy mal, muy pero muy mal, psíquicamente mal, por no poder alimentar a nuestras propias familias, aún trabajando todo el día. En esa crisis tan profunda nace Familias Productoras de Cañuelas. ¡Vamos, Javier! No necesariamente hacen falta los químicos para hacer producciones intensas, de buena calidad. Y bueno, nosotros tenemos totalmente demostrado que se puede producir sin el uso de ningún tipo de fertilización química. En Brasil existen espacios que se llaman tierra preta, que tienen hasta 3 metros de altura de capa humífera. Y esas tierras no son naturales, fueron hechas por nuestros pueblos originarios durante miles y miles de años. Hubo miles de años de agricultura en esos lugares y en lugar de la tierra quedar devastada, hay 3 metros de capa de humus. Eso es proceder con la Pachamama, con nuestra tierra, pensando en la tierra, no solo en la producción y en el bolsillo, en el dinero. ¿Vamos caminando?
And what I have found in my 25 years of working with biodiversity, working to build ecological agriculture systems, is that chemical-free, poison-free agriculture systems which intensify ecological processes, which intensify biodiversity, produce more food per acre and more nutrition per acre. That's the way we must go, precisely because the population is increasing.
Que estas siembras que realiza esta familia de este campo es una semilla que por años se ha estado conservando por generaciones. Estamos hablando unos 40 a 50 años que esta familia ha estado cosechando su propia semilla, de tal manera que ellos difícilmente aceptan una aplicación de plaguicidas. Ellos tradicionalmente conocen su forma de controlar tanto insectos como enfermedades y malezas. Este proyecto de esta familia sirve para otras organizaciones, para otros pueblos, sirve de ejemplo porque a través de los talleres que hemos podido compartir con ellos, nos han enseñado pues de que el mantener una alimentación sana es el futuro para los niños principalmente.
This is Oscar. He is our organic farmer. He does different types of vegetables and bananas, beans, amaranthus, cucumber. This is organic. This is 8 types organic. This is the field of Oscar.
The problems in Kasaragod is now being turned around on a positive note where from a pesticide hit or pesticide impacted community, now we are moving towards the survivors of this on a very positive note where we can produce food without pesticides, we can provide rural livelihood without using chemicals. There is in that sense we see a lot of hope.
Since 2003, the Organic Bazaar in Kerala has helped small farmers give up chemical-intensive agriculture to deliver safer, more sustainable produce. This farmers' market was inspired by the growing organic movement in the United States.
What I thought might happen, hope might happen, it turned out did happen, was the Organic Farm Bill. People started paying a lot more attention, and that hobby type thing that the detractors called it is now turning into a $30 billion a year business in the United States, about the only agriculture business that's growing. But also, more importantly, people started asking questions.
I think the best approach to handling a particular political, I'd say controversial issue, like the choice between profit for corporations or protection of human beings, the first instigation should be the American public, to educate the American public about what's going on.
We have to start thinking about the alternatives rather than putting more and more energy into trying to beef up risk mitigation in the conventional chemical industrial complex. We need people to say, we don't want the hazards, we don't want to support the hazards, we don't want to export our chemicals, we don't want to import poisons on our food, we want communities where our food is produced to be safe, we want our food to be safe, we know the systems exist, we need leadership desperately, we need an uprising.
In recent years, an uprising has been gaining momentum. In 2012, rallies were organised around the country to protest against Monsanto, but less than 20 people attended one in New York City. At a second round of protests 1 year later, 2 million people showed up in 52 countries to march against Monsanto.
They want you to believe that there's not enough food on this planet to feed everybody. They want you to believe that you need their products in order to feed the hungry and the poor.
I'm here marching for Sofia in Argentina, who organized mothers in her community and demanded that Monsanto stop poisoning her children. I'm here for Santiago in Argentina, who's using the power of social media to know that his town will not be used as an experimental zone for new GMOs and new pesticides. I'm here for Paco in Mexico, who's organizing Yaqui farmers to go back to traditional organic methods of farming and stop using hazardous pesticides and GMOs. And finally, I'm here with my friends from Benal in India, who are spreading the word and trying to hold these corporations accountable for the atrocities that they're causing.
Well, you know, I'm hopeful too. I think there's a lot of things going on in the world regarding this issue to give hope. And I hope over time that humanity will come together and solve this problem. I don't think a problem that entrenched, that's been doing this much damage for that many years, and we're talking about long-term environmental and health damage, probably damaging the immune systems of human beings, perhaps allowing new diseases to crop up, weakening us as a species. I don't think a problem that embedded in our culture and our history can be taken lightly. I think we all need to stay focused on finding solutions that will, you know, maybe render that history non-repeatable. I wish I could say I was hopeful that would happen.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, my fellow Americans, we need to work together on tools like Bipartisan Trade Promotion Authority to protect our workers, protect our environment, and open new markets to new goods stamped made in the USA.
My name is Evan Miscagni. I just returned from India, where I am working on a documentary film about the use of hazardous chemicals. Now, many of these chemicals are made here in the United States, and we ship them overseas to poor countries. I'm wondering if you can speak about capitalism from a Buddhist perspective, and specifically the idea of placing profits over human health and the environment.
Oh, capitalist, the market-oriented economy, it is quite a dynamic sort of force. That also there are some good points. But then without much concern about real human sort of equal right, exploiting, only think about money, profit. I think this country really wonderful, wonderful. However, huge gap, rich and poor. Then those richer people only concern profit. I think a truly capitalist sort of thinking, just profit. So I want to use the word we, you and myself must educate. It's our responsibility. Tell more. And this case, you actually experienced as a sort of scientific sort of researcher. So tell people through articles, through radio talks, like that. Very, very important. Educate people.